I previously served as the chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a lawyer, but I certainly have observed that this president has displayed evidence of narcissism and other psychological disorders that those of us laypersons would certainly be deeply concerned about. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists here to briefly discuss their observations about this president and his ability to handle the coronavirus national emergency that he just declared tonight. We have with us tonight Dr. James Gilligan, a psychiatrist, a violence expert, and a professor of law at New York University. We have Dr. Ellen Kachek, professor of psychology at San Jose State University. Dr. John Zimmer, a former NIMH researcher, a professor of psychiatry at George Washington University. Dr. Susan Vaughn, a psychoanalyst and professor of psychiatry at Columbia University. Dr. Kevin Washington, a psychologist and head of the departments of psychology and sociology at Granville State University. Dr. Edwin Fisher, a clinical psychologist and professor of behavioral and public health at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to offer a few words on their observations on our president's mental state and his ability to handle the present crisis. Would like to start, Dr. Gilligan?
Dr. Gilligan isn't here.
Oh, well.
Nor is Dr. Washington.
Oh, well, then we'll have to have, who would like to start? Dr. Zimmer?
Okay, I have a little bit more than a few words about this because I wanted to speak out about why, faced with the coronavirus pandemic, Donald Trump has the real potential to become ever more dangerous, acting vindictively and impulsively now with a sense of impunity, which poses a threat to the safety of our nation. I think the sense of impunity comes from the fact that he was acquitted of the impeachment charges. At the moment, the world is facing a pandemic which threatens the lives of untold numbers of people here and abroad.
Okay, looks like.
In 2018, prompted by his pervasive destructive envy of Barack Obama, Trump fired the head of the White House Global Health Security Team and disbanded its activities. This group within the National Security Council, organized by then President Obama, was tasked with preparing for the inevitable pandemic which is assailing us at this very moment. Trump's vindictive envy and lack of concern for anyone other than himself has placed us all in peril. Now, there are many things to say about the psychology of Donald Trump, which I would like to use my psychiatric and psychoanalytic knowledge to explicate. He's remarkably transparent through his Twitter stream of comments, real-time video displays, and newspaper accounts, past and present, as well as testimonies of persons who know or have known him. I, as a psychiatrist, observe enough from his overt behaviors, displayed emotions, thought content, and ways of relating to others that in the absence of evidence to the contrary, I believe he has a severe disorder of self-esteem known as narcissistic personality disorder, described in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual number 5, the American Psychiatric Association. Now, the core problem in this disorder is a failure in childhood and beyond to develop an inner sense of worth or self-esteem. This makes one's sense of worth entirely dependent upon admiration from others, such as at the rallies of Donald Trump's base. Without this external affirmation, President Trump feels deep down like a loser, failure, weak, dumb, fat, ugly, fake, and crooked. These self-denigrating pictures of himself Trump projects onto others, whom he transforms into enemies. Nevertheless, these traits are his own subconscious inner views of himself, for which he compensates consciously by creating a grandiose image of himself as unique, stable genius, entitled to special treatment, and better at everything than anyone else. What makes Donald Trump so dangerous is the brittleness of his sense of worth. Any criticism is experienced as a humiliation or degradation. To cope with the resultant hollow and empty feelings, he reacts with what is referred to as narcissistic rage. He is unable to take responsibility for any error, mistake, or failing. His default in that situation is to blame others and to attack the perceived source of this humiliation. These attacks of narcissistic rage can be brutal and destructive for reasons that are also due to the underlying disturbance. Especially, these include a lack of capacity for empathy, compassion, authentic guilt, remorse, or fundamentally caring about the other person. Donald Trump genuinely cares for no one but himself. He lacks the capacity to feel regret or to avoid the harm he can cause others. A striking but not unusual example of this lack of caring and empathy is his policy of separating children from their parents at the southern border. It is also present in his unwillingness to disembark passengers for a cruise ship, lest the numbers of American coronavirus patients show an increase, which would reflect upon his ineffectiveness and possibly hinder his reelection. My purpose has been to describe the psychological source of Donald Trump's dangerousness and to warn of it becoming more intense following the impeachment process and as the coronavirus pandemic expands. This viral threat to the lives of untold numbers of our country's residents should give us the greatest pause for concern.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask for Dr. Kashak on the line for her observations.
Thank you. I can, as an educator and a clinical psychologist, I consider one of my obligations to be to translate the complexity of the DSM into language that everyone can understand. And I want to do a little bit more of that tonight. As a result of severe and intractable disorders, Donald Trump does not lead by logic or strategic planning. He doesn't have experience in the matters with which he is dealing, nor does he value or attempt learning. He does not depend on experts for sage advice, which he could then weigh seriously. Instead, he leads by manipulating emotions, particularly the darker ones such as hatred, greed, and discrimination. He really does not even lead, but stirs up and excites his crowds of admirers. He stirs up what is already in existence, although perhaps dormant in most of them, and offers them ready targets for their discontent. Whether his comment stories even resemble the truth is of little import in his scheme of things. He has learned to fake it, to con the system, to distract from his own inner emptiness and lack of capability, to look like a tough guy when he is in truth as weak as they come. The schoolyard bully displays all the emotional maturity and intellectual capacity of a 6-year-old who wins elections by giving juvenile nicknames to his opponents and riling up those who are at his same level of immaturity. His supporters either identify with what they mistake for strength or are frightened and too traumatized to see what he really is, much like a long-term victim of domestic violence who is not able to leave her abuser. Nancy Pelosi, who as a mother and grandmother has shown that she knows how to deal with a little boy's tantrums, even if that little boy is in an adult body. She has revealed his lack of emotional impulse control for dangerous image. In retaliation, he's been vicious in his attacks of her. He's trying to look strong when he's really weak, or he would not have to bully. He doesn't even have the wherewithal to try to look kind, empathic, or concerned about anyone but himself. He actually announced publicly that he does not take responsibility for the current conflict and concern with coronavirus. Unlike the rest of us, when he looks around a room, he sees only his own reflection. This man is a domestic abuser in the largest sense of the word, as he daily and publicly ridicules his enemies, and the list is always increasing. demeans and traumatizes women, puts children in cages, and attacks people of color and LGBT citizens. He respects no one, not even himself, or he wouldn't be doing this. You don't have to divide people if you're not interested in conquering them. You don't have to stir up violent emotions if you're not trying to incite violence. You don't have to prey upon others' freedom of speech if you're not trying to destroy that very right. And now his desired monarchy and crown are going to be blown to smithereens by a larger and more powerful crown or corona. He reveals himself once again to be ignorant, understanding this threat, and inept in combating it effectively. He appoints his silently adoring, sycophantic vice president to prepare to protect the American public. This man is perhaps one of the least qualified in the country to lead this effort, as proven by his very record against the AIDS epidemic in his home state. Family and other unambivalent admirers. The experts are too much of a threat and have already been banished from his weakened kingdom and his shaky ego. The American public is facing a calamity unprotected and undefended by this man and his administration. At the end, Trump and his supporters will not be able to lie or to trick their way out of this one. They too will die on a bed of their greed and lies. When that happens, no amount of lying or gaslighting or shaming of opponents will be able to convince the sick and the dying that it has not occurred. Material reality must win the day. It's a stronger force. Don't mess with Mother Nature. In a lesser situation, this psychopathology should result in an assessment, and the law allows this to be done even involuntarily in a situation of extreme danger, such as that which we find ourselves in today. As we can't get direct access to him, our committee is doing the next best thing required by our professions, trying to warn the public.
Thank you. I'll ask Dr. Susan Vaughn for her observations.
Yes, hi, Richard, thank you. In COVID-19, Trump has encountered an inescapable foe that threatens to expose his worst secret fear, namely that he is small, weak, incompetent, and incapable to serve as our commander-in-chief as we go to war against a tiny piece of RNA surrounded by a thin protective capsule. When ideas like "I am weak" threaten to emerge into his consciousness, counterforces known as defense mechanisms are mobilized to quell his anxiety and the anxiety these ideas engender, and to block these ideas out of his awareness. Many of us use mature defense mechanisms such as sublimation, in which we write a novel or paint a painting about a difficult experience, or humor, in which a joke recognizes reality in a new way and momentarily relieves us of the anxiety about the truth. Healthy higher order defenses like sublimation and humor both protect us from anxiety and also preserve our capacity to live in reality without distorting it. But Trump does not use mature defenses. His behavior suggests he uses primitive defenses that distort reality, rendering him unable to see the world as it really is. Let me describe 3 such defenses that make him really dangerous. In splitting, a person sees only positive or negative aspects of the self or other. This results in a black and white world in which people are either idealized or devalued. The idealized person is seen as all powerful and all good, while the devalued other is seen as lacking or bad. Splitting prevents a person from rendering the positives and negatives of themselves and others into a cogent, nuanced whole view, which is necessarily a mix of good and bad traits. This defense often results in the same person being seen as all good or all bad at different times. Think of John Kelly, a once revered general who made Trump feel strong and now made the mistake of pointing out the errors that Donald Trump had made. First all good, then all bad. Consider Mike Pence, who as long as he is a Trump loyalist will be seen as all good, but the moment Trump gets pushback about handling of the coronavirus, Pence will have done a terrible job and will be thrown under the bus. It's a pattern we've seen over and over with everyone from Jeff Sessions to Mick Mulvaney. Meanwhile, the person doing the splitting is certain in that moment about their positive or negative view of the other, and they are often simply unable to recognize that they ever felt differently. Trump forgets he ever trusted Tom Bossert as his trusted DHS secretary when Bossert lays into him in public, calling his travel ban a poor use of time and energy. Projection means externalizing a trait or behavior of our own that we want to get rid of, placing it onto something or someone outside of ourselves, and then experiencing it as coming at us from the outside world. A boomerang defense, Trump's own rage and paranoia threatened to spin out of control. Desperately seeking to avoid feelings of inadequacy about self and other leads to gross exaggerations. Others have bungled their coronavirus response, while his is, quote, the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history, even as we all see daily that the response has been inadequate in the US. Projection also renders Trump self-pitying, or feeling as if the world is out to get him. In denial, which is common in childhood and considered the most primitive of all defenses, a person simply blocks an external event from awareness and refuses to accept it. Rather than feel the humiliation and shame of having mismanaged COVID-19 so miserably, owning up, apologizing, and getting back on track, which might even be admired, Trump for days simply refused to acknowledge the growing number of cases. And yes, when he says there are 5 cases only and they're on their way to being 0, he really believes what he's saying in that moment, because that's what denial is. He's not lying, he's denying. He may well have heard that the accurate numbers on the way to the microphone moments before, but he simply cannot face a reality that seems to fly in the face of what is needed for his own self-esteem regulation and his re-election as well. Related to denial is omnipotent fantasy, in which Trump has the grandiose fantasy that he understands much more than the WHO, citing a hunch, or telling the public how smart he is and how much he gets it. Notoriously germophobic all his life, he now shakes hands defiantly because he believes at some level that he's all powerful and therefore would never catch it. Sick people are weak people, and only the weak will get coronavirus. Therefore, he is safe. Being unable to be in touch with reality as it really is renders our president highly dangerous, behaving in ways that are self-aggrandizing and meant to ward off the horror of weakness and failure, which is his core psychological concern. He is acting on what is best for Donald Trump's own self-esteem or re-election, not what is best for the US and our citizens. Trump is caught in a primitive mental state where everything is about winning and losing, and he will do anything to avoid being a loser in the zero-sum game of life he is playing, even if that desire to win at all costs ends up costing Americans their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll ask for Dr. Fisher, if he is still on the line.
Yeah.
Some observations.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack. What I've been thinking about a lot over the last 3 years is the way Trump surrounds himself with people, and especially contrasting that with President Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's well known President Kennedy brought together a talented, smart, distinguished, diverse group of people to help guide the country through the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was only one problem with this distinguished group. They disagreed, and it was left for President Kennedy to call the shot. As he put it, there stands the decision, there stands the president. And God help us that we should have a crisis anything like the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Trump is left to call the shot. Now, we've all thought about President Trump's dangerousness over the last few years in terms of wars and nuclear weapons. But what we're learning over these months is that this dangerousness extends to his utter failure to be able to lead the country in dealing with a very, very frightening pandemic. In terms of the people around him, he started with a fairly distinguished group of Mattis, Tillerson, McMaster, General Kelly, but typical of what we would expect for somebody so preoccupied with how people reinforce his view of himself. Those people have fallen away as they have won his disfavor. and have been replaced by the group of sycophantic people that currently comprise the leadership in the White House and in many of the federal agencies. And this is now playing out with the coronavirus, where last week we saw Secretary Azar and Vice President Pence at pains to be able to say as often as they could under the president's leadership, in describing the paltry efforts that had been taken to fight the coronavirus. In this current cast of characters, Dr. Fauci from the Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, a distinguished and highly revered member of his profession and specialty, Dr. Fauci is the General Mattis. He's the person who's respected in the field that others are looking to be strong and hold the line, and he's doing that. He's struggling to keep from offending the president and maintain his position where he can do some good and save some lives. But God help us if President Trump turns on Dr. Fauci and decides that his homage and fealty is not sufficient. The other thing I want to talk about is the impulsivity of the president. We saw that extensively in the Mueller report, describing how he ordered McGahn and Lewandowski to tell Sessions to get rid of the Mueller investigation, to suppress it. And they simply ignored what he told them, and he just gave up on it. So it was a flailing about that he gave up on. And we see the impulsivity in dealing with the coronavirus that the other speakers have talked about in the last couple of minutes. We also see the impulsivity in dealing with the economic crisis that the virus has spawned. A wise friend a number of years ago told me that the Dow Jones at 22,000 would be President Trump's savior. And we saw the Dow fall down back below 22,000 this week and scare the pants off of the stock market and much of the economic community. President Trump's ability to guide the economy has become clearly wanting, as well as his ability to guide the country in response to a virus. So we put these things together, the impulsivity, the turning to a very small coterie of people telling him that he's wonderful. And the more that group shrinks, the more he becomes impulsive, the more the pressure builds from the virus, from the economy, and from the probable difficulty in winning re-election, the more unpredictable he will become. This is all a downward spiral that can be very, very scary. What to do? It's really important that others step up and recognize that nobody is the president other than the president, but other people can do things. We saw yesterday in the Congress, a very smart congresswoman from California force the head of the CDC to use his legal authority to guarantee free screening for all Americans who can't afford it. We saw today House Leader Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin come to a compromise to agree on legislation that ignores the president's calling for a payroll tax. So we see the governors of New York and California taking actions to make things safer in their states. So those of us in positions, those that need to recognize that President Trump is fully impaired, it's not going to get better. He will not change his characteristics, and it's time for all that who can to step up and fill the gap.
Thank you, Doctor. I, as a layperson, I'm very concerned about this. I was only 2 years old, 1963, at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I have read a great deal about what happened there. The enormous pressure on the president, and a situation where the president had made rash decisions, emotional decisions, or thought about his own ego up against Khrushchev, and trying to reinforce his own ego, his sense of manhood, we might very well not be here today.
That's right.
And we don't know what situations this president will confront that come out of the coronavirus crisis or something else. But he is in control of the nuclear weapons that could destroy human civilization in 20 minutes. And so the question is the profession of psychiatry, are those of you in the profession going to continue to adhere to the gold water rule, which tells you to keep silent in these situations, or implies that you should keep silent? Or do you speak out? The cost to you professionally of perhaps violating the gold water rule is there. It's certainly stressful to be accused of being unethical. But what is the cost on the other side of the equation? When we do not speak out, when someone is in a position of power, who is abusing that power, who is psychologically deranged, and is taking advantage of other people who are psychologically deranged. And what is the potential downside for human civilization in the nuclear age? These are the questions I'm going to ask everyone to think about. I hope we can convene this group again with others to have this conversation. It's an important conversation for ourselves, for our children, for the future of human civilization. So I thank you all, and if we want to have a discussion, or we may want to continue this discussion at a later time. We've had some tough technical difficulties tonight with Zoom. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I checked the news stories and I see that Joe Biden has had some technical disasters with his town hall tonight. And I don't know if Vladimir has paid us a visit or whether there's just overload with the professors trying to use Zoom to prepare for their classes next week, because most of us go online with our students. But I thank everyone for their patience and waiting for this program to go online. And I think it's going to be very, very important to continue this conversation.
When I think about the Goldwater rule, my reason for violating it is that I would not want to have done what people at the Berlin Psychoanalytic did in the days of Hitler, where they saw the danger, they said nothing, and look at the result. And that's why I'm speaking out tonight.
Exactly right.
Amen.
Thank you. I think we'll discontinue the conversation now for this evening, but I very much want to reconvene this group and ask others to join. If we are able to post this on YouTube and Twitter, I would welcome comments on what issues we would like this group or others to address. These are matters of critical importance to our country. And as I said, in the nuclear age, to the future of human civilization. So I thank you for your attention tonight and look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you very much.
Are we done?
I believe we're done. I think we're finished for tonight. Let's, if we can get this up, if someone could send this to me by email in a form that's easy to tweet out.